Welcome to RPRA's registration walkthrough for tire producers. At this time, all lines are in a listen-only mode. To ask a question at any time during the presentation or for technical assistance, please type your question in the text box provided on the screen and press enter. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. I would now like to turn the conference over to Ellen White, Communication Advisor at RPRA. Ellen?
Thank you, Tammy, and good morning, and welcome to the Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority's registration walkthrough for tire producers. The first question we always get asked is, what's our preferred acronym? Is it RPRA? Is it RIPRA? Is it the authority? We're fine with anything that helps communicate better. But regardless of the acronym or our name, we're here to provide you with a walkthrough for tire producers of the entire registration process, and then also to answer any questions you have about whether you are required to register and what those requirements will be. I'm joined today by Pat Moran, our registrar, and Mary Cummins, our acting deputy registrar, who will be leading the presentation and answering questions throughout the webinar. Just to go through the webinar interface a little bit, you'll see that the actual presentation slides are located on the left-hand side of your screen. And then, as Tammy mentioned, if you need to answer a question or ask a question at any time during the presentation, you can type it into the Q&A box and hit enter. We have about 100 people registered for today's webinar, so we're only taking written questions. If we tried to open it up to a phone Q&A, it would get a bit cumbersome. So we're going to posit several points in the presentation to take questions, and we hope to get through all of them. Again, we only do have around 90 minutes today, so we may not be able to get through all of them, at which point we will follow up with you after the presentation. As well, we're focusing our Q&A today on more general information that's going to be relevant to producers in general. So if you ask a question that's very specific to your individual case, we may also take that offline. You can also, if you have individual questions, always contact our registry support team. They're available 9 to 5, Monday to Friday by phone, or you can submit questions through the web. And at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll provide you with all that information. So the last thing before I hand it over, our slides today are based on our registration walkthrough document. It's located on our website. If you go to rpra.ca/registry, you'll find it on the right-hand side of the page under the Have a Question box, and it's called the Registration Walkthrough. So if you wanted to follow along with the slides today, you can find them in that document. And of course, we are recording this webinar, and we will post it in that same box, that Have a Question box, after the presentation today. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat Moran to get us started.
Thanks very much, Ellen, and good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for agreeing to signing up to participate in this webinar. As Ellen said, we're going to use a document that's already on the website, our registration walkthrough, as the basis for this presentation. I know that there will be people with a lot of questions, and I just wanted to emphasize something that Ellen already touched on, which is many of you will have questions that are very specific to your context, and we want to be able to answer all of those questions. Our objective today, though, is to stay at a general level and answer questions that are generally applicable. It's important to understand that that the information we're giving you today is general in nature, and obviously there's important legal components to much of what has to be done, and people are obviously responsible for making sure they get the legal advice they need to make sure that they're doing what they do. But by the same token, we want to be able to help you as much as possible through the course of this presentation and afterwards if you want to call our registry officers. So as everybody knows, the current used tires program that is being operated by Ontario Tire Stewardship is going to be wound up at the end of this year, and that's starting in January 1st of 2019. Individual producer responsibility is going to be in place, and the authority will be responsible for the for compliance and enforcement of that new regime. And we'll be getting into some aspects of that as part of the registration process in a few minutes, but there are a few key deadlines that are in play at the moment, and I'm just going to touch on those briefly. So the registry, which we have been working for the last year to build, is now open for tire producers and producer responsibility organizations, or PROs. We went live on July 3rd of 2018, and the deadline that comes up first is the deadline for registration for tire producers. If you are a tire producer, you have to be registered with the authority by August 31st, so the end of next month. Beginning on September 4th, we will open up the registry for tire service providers, so that's the tire collectors, the haulers, the retreaders, and the processors. And the deadline for that group is October 31st, 2018. And then we will open up the registry for tire producers, or for the pros on behalf of tire producers, to report in on the tire collection systems and the tire management systems that they've established as required under the regulation. And there's a 2-week period with a deadline of November 15th in the regulation.
Okay, so before we get into the registration process, I'll just pause here if anyone has any questions specific to the registration deadlines. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come in, so we'll go to step 1 of the process.
Thanks, Alan. So I'm going to start with what you need to know before you come in to register. Obviously, the biggest question for a producer before coming in to go through the registration process is to determine if, in fact, you actually are a producer. And the starting point is, does your business deal with new tires, or does it deal with new vehicles or other wheeled equipment, including things like farm equipment, trailers, wheelbarrows, anything that's got wheels that have tires on them? Does your business deal with any of those things which involve new tires? And if that is the case, then you may well be a producer under the tire regulation. The tire regulation establishes a hierarchy of producers, and it starts with either the manufacturer or the brand holder. So if you're a manufacturer of tires or of vehicles that are delivered with new tires on them, and you're resident in Ontario, then you're going to be the producer for those vehicles and those tires. If there isn't a resident brand holder or manufacturer in the province, and you're the person that actually imported those vehicles or those tires into the province, and you're resident in Ontario, then you're going to be the producer at that point. If there isn't a person like that who's resident in the province, then and you're the first person that's going to be marketing those tires or vehicles to a consumer directly, then you're going to be the producer for those tires or vehicles. And then the last category is if there's nobody resident in Ontario at all, and those tires or vehicles are being marketed from outside of Ontario to a consumer inside of Ontario, then that person who's outside of Ontario will be the producer. We know that under the OTS system that a number of stewards who are registered with the OTS system were remitting information on behalf of people even if they weren't resident themselves. And this is an issue that we have seen come up in a number of different ways over the last several weeks. And again, from our perspective, what we want to emphasize is that there is a very specific definition of producer in the regulation. The responsibility that's imposed on producers in that regulation, these are important responsibilities, and there really isn't anything in the regulation that permits anybody to voluntarily do something on behalf of a producer, particularly if that person isn't currently resident in Ontario. And the definition of what is resident in Ontario is based on the Corporate Tax Act, and again, it's very important that people go through the process of understanding their own situation, getting their own legal advice on this, but and anybody who's in a situation where they're not sure, what our view is going to be with respect to their ability to register as producers or and to provide the information that's required under the regulation, we would strongly encourage them to contact us and have a conversation with us, because at the end of the day, the regulation identifies specifically what producers have to do, and our job is to make sure that the producers who are required to do things actually do those things and understand what it is they have to do, and where it's not done, to take appropriate compliance steps to get it done. So I'm going to pause here to see if there's any questions that people may have before I move on to the next part of the presentation.
Yeah, we have a couple questions coming in, and the first one is, are new tires imported into Ontario and then exported to other provinces upon sale subject to RPRA?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I guess the quick answer is no. The entire program under the regulation is focused on tires that are delivered into the Ontario market and used in the Ontario market becoming used tires in Ontario. So the program is basically saying, if you're delivering a product in Ontario and then that product is used in Ontario, then it's subject to the regulation. We know that tires move around a lot, and based on how the market is working across Canada and across North America, and we're only focused on the tires that are delivered and become used tires in Ontario.
And then the next question we have is RPRA focusing on used tires or only new tires?
Actually, we're focusing on both of those. So on the producer registration end of things, producers have to provide the supply data for the required years. For the first round, it's the years of 2014, 15, and 16. So those are new tires delivered directly or delivered on a vehicle. And then on the service provider end, we're focused obviously on the used tires. So collectors and haulers and retreaders and processors are going to have to register and tell us what they're doing with the used tires. And obviously, with a producer responsibility regime, the producers are actually responsible for making sure that the collection target that's established for them is actually met, that they're entering into the relationships that they need to enter into to make sure that a sufficient number of tires are collected so that they each meet their individual collection targets, and that a sufficient amount of tires are actually recycled so that they each individually meet their tire recovery targets under the regulation.
Okay, and then just a last follow-up question from that. Will producers need to report their used tire sales?
I'm just thinking for a moment. No, I think that, again, the quick answer is that producers are required to report new tires or vehicles with new tires on them. We know that there is a market for used tires in there, but those are sort of intermediate between the new tires that producers are reporting on and then the used tires that get recovered. So if a tire continues to be reused as a tire, then that's something that can be counted towards your tire recovery target down the road if it's tracked properly. But if it isn't, then it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, all that matters is that you're collecting enough used tires to demonstrate that you've met your targets.
Okay. And then the next question we have is around importing equipment. So if we import into Ontario farm equipment manufactured in Ontario but sold both in and outside of Ontario and internationally, will there be a process to track this?
So the farm equipment that's manufactured in Ontario and that's sold in Ontario, that's the only equipment that has to be reported. If you manufacture it in Ontario and sell it internationally or outside of Ontario, somewhere else in Canada, you don't have to report that. Again, it's only what happens in Ontario that's important. And we know that, and I should have made this point a little earlier on some of the other questions, we know that at the end of a particular year, it's not always immediately certain exactly how many tires were actually supplied into Ontario and used in Ontario. And I know that under the OTS system, there was a one-year period to allow for adjustments. And if you look at how the regulation is organized, you'll see that that was taken into account by the ministry. The years that were selected for establishing the collection targets are historical years, 2014, 15, and 16, which means there's a 2-year lag period between 2016 and the current registration year, which means there's more than enough time for any adjustments that have to be made to that data so that it's actually reflective of what happened in Ontario. So, and that would be the same for whether it's tires or new vehicles that are being sold in Ontario or outside of Ontario.
Okay. And the next question is, again, if we can clarify the definition of a vehicle. Are there any new wheeled equipment that will be exempt or is exempt under the regulation?
Yeah, so the definition of vehicle is very, very broad. We know specifically that bicycles, for example, are exempted, and wheelchairs and electric wheelchairs and other mobility devices like that are also specifically exempted, but everything else is in. So it's important to recognize that OTS had a list of equipment that was specifically exempted from reporting on their system. So there are a lot of things like wheelbarrows and hand trucks and dollies and all of those. So those are not exempted in the regulation. The only thing that doesn't have to be reported in those categories are tires that are less than 1 kilogram, which would probably exclude the vast majority of that wheeled equipment, but there will be equipment that has tires on it that are 1 kilogram or more in weight, and so they would have to be reported. We also know that the fact that previously people were reporting tires into OTS and would like to use that information to report it to us some people will be faced with the reality that if they weren't previously reporting, for example, wheelbarrow tires, they're now having to figure out how to meet that requirement under regulation. And we're preparing some compliance guidance on that so that the benefit of being able to rely on OTS information can still be utilized while at the same time meeting the additional reporting requirement for these new categories that were previously exempted in the OTS system.
Okay, so that seems to be the questions for now. So we'll move on to the remainder of the registration checklist.
Just before we move on, let me just make one general point. The producer question, we understand, is a complex one for some people who are looking at their own situation. And again, I just want to strongly encourage anybody who wants to have a conversation with our registry team about their specific situation, please feel free to do that. We want to make sure that people have a good understanding of what their compliance requirements are. We want people to know what they have to do in order to comply, and we want people to comply. We don't want to wait until people are out of compliance and then go chasing them. Our primary objective is to make sure that people have a good understanding of what they need to do and have the opportunity to do it and be in compliance. Okay, so the next part of the presentation I think is pretty straightforward. Everybody who's operating a business somewhere in Canada and makes remittances to CRA will have a CRA number, and so you should have this available so that when you come in to register, you can enter it when you're asked for it. The reason we've asked for the CRA number is to make sure that we don't run into a situation where a producer ends up with duplicate accounts, and we recognize that some companies who are producers, have franchisees or multiple locations who might come in individually or separately from one another for whatever reason, and if the business was already registered, then this would be a way of screening that kind of problem out. We also know that there may be a producer who doesn't have a CRA number because they're not resident in Canada or Ontario and don't remit anything. And if that's the case, then you simply have to call in to the registry support center, and there's a workaround that will help you get through the registration process. We also know that many businesses have legal business names that are different from the name that they use to carry on business under. So you might be Ontario 12876 Limited as a legal entity, but your true name might be Joe's Tires, and so we want to get both of those names, the legal business name and the name that you operate under. If the two are the same, then you just enter that same name in twice where it's required. And then, of course, if you've already been a steward in the OTS system, you'll already have an OTS registration number, and again, there will be an opportunity to provide that number to us. So make sure you have your CRA business number, make sure you have your legal business name and your OTS stewardship number, and then the rest, of course, is pretty straightforward. Slide. The last part of the checklist deals with two documents that you will have to upload during the registration process. So I want to touch base on those briefly. One is called a declaration of producer brands. Essentially, this is a spreadsheet and which you download ahead of time so that you can enter into that spreadsheet information about what brands that you're actually the producer for. So when you look at the spreadsheet, you will see that there's two sides to it. One side deals with tires, and the other side deals with vehicles. So if you're a producer because of you're selling, manufacturing, or importing vehicles with new tires on, you have to provide us with the brands of the vehicles. We don't need the brands of the tires on those vehicles, just the vehicles themselves. And if you're importing or you're the brand holder or the manufacturer for tires, that's when we need the brands of the tires that you deal with. And it's possible, for example, that somebody who manufactures trailers for sale in Ontario is also buying replacement tires for customers, so you would be entering in the brand names of your trailers, and you would be entering in the brand names of the tires that you sell as replacement tires. So that's the declaration of producer brands. Then there's the requirement to complete an executive attestation form. So this basically is a form that where a senior executive in the company is going to attest to the fact that the information that is being put into the registry during registration process is complete and accurate. The reason that we wanted people to print this out and have someone actually sign it was driven by the fact that we're into a new process now that's a bit different from OTS, the OTS system. There are actual enforceable legal requirements, and we felt that it was important that there was an opportunity for people at the top of the company, the CEO or the CFO, as the case may be, to understand that something new is happening, and so that appropriate systems for due diligence and compliance plans and all of that are properly taken into account. So if somebody puts this in front of the CEO and says, I need you to sign it, the CEO has an opportunity to say, well, what is this all about, and what are the consequences, and all of that, and it's everything being done to make sure that we're in compliance. So, and we felt that this was the best way to kind of communicate that we have a new regime in town under this tires regulation. So again, if there's any questions at this point, I'm happy to take them before we move on to the next section.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything coming in at the moment, but maybe we'll just give everyone a few minutes or a few seconds to type them in.
And we'll catch up on any questions that people put in as I continue, and we'll come back to them later on in the presentation as required. All right, so then we get into, so you've got all the things that are on the checklist. You've figured out I am a producer. You figured out what kind of producer. I've figured out what brands I'm responsible for. And I've got my signed executive attestation, which I've then scanned and uploaded so that it's now a PDF file available for uploading. And I've saved my spreadsheet with my brands on it, and it's available. So now I'm ready to set up my account. Pretty standard account creation process that you'll have seen in many different contexts. What's your name? Put in the CRA business number, put in the Ontario Tire Stewardship number if it's applicable, and then just continue on from there. Standard contact information. You'll see that the starting point is my business has a Canadian address, and the default is the tick box is checked off. If your business does not have a Canadian address, then you just uncheck that box, and then you'll have the opportunity to enter in that address. When it's checked off, it just defaults. There's a pull-down list for Ontario, for provinces, and so on. And if you uncheck it, then you can enter whatever country it is that you want to put in there. You will have to identify who's going to be the business primary registry user. The next slide. So this is the person who's directly responsible for essentially maintaining this account over time. This person gets to establish who's going to be a secondary user. This person will have the ability to add secondary users, to identify who's going to be the billing contact. You can do it. You can add users during the registration process. You can come in anytime, log in anytime, and add users down the road. If the primary user changes for whatever reason, there's a manual process that people will have to follow in order to establish a new primary user. It just means that, for example, if the primary user took a new job and was still registered as the primary user, and the person who's taking over that job wants to take it on, there's no ability to change that from outside. You'll have to call in, and then a registry officer will help you get you set up as a primary user after a few due diligence questions and making sure you are who you are and that the company is still the company that should be dealing with this information. And then of course, you'll have a chance to review the information that you've put in creating the account. If you want to make a change, you just hit the edit button as required. If everything's good, then the last thing you have to do before you hit create account is to check the box next to the registry terms of use that you accept those terms of use, and then you get to move on. And once you've done that, then your account is created. The moment the account is created, you will get an email, an automatic email that will go to your account. We know that from time to time people's spam filters might prevent that email from arriving, or it may end up in a junk mail and you're waiting and you can't find it. So check your junk mail account. If you can't find it there, then we've provided the URL in this document that you can give to your IT people so that it can be identified as a safe domain to receive messages from. And if you're still having problems, of course, just call registry support, and we'll help you with that problem as well. So when you get this email, this is basically to validate the email address that identifies your account, and you click on the link that's in that email. That basically tells the registry, yes, this is a real email, and then we carry on to the next step. So once you've clicked on that link, you get a second email, which will have a verification code in it. Our registry system is built so as to require what we call two-factor authentication every time you log in. So after you've created your account and validated your email address and eventually log out, the next time you log in, you will still get an email with a code in it, and you'll have to use that code in order to complete the login process. This is really for security purposes because we recognize that producers are providing us with commercially sensitive information, and one of the measures we've taken to protect that information is to require two-factor authentication so that people can't remotely log in. If they don't have access to that email account, they won't get the code and they can't get in that way. Obviously, we can't prevent 100% anybody hacking in, but we can certainly put in some basic protections that make sense. So once you see that verification code, you enter that in. Keep in mind that a new tab opens up in your browser, so the registration process is still open in a separate tab, so when you're finished with the verification process, just get back into the browser page that you're in and then continue with the registration process. Once you've entered your verification code, then you get to create your password, and there's some rules that have to be met in order for it to be a valid password, and once you've complied with that, you can set your password, and then we move on. So again, if there's any questions at this point,
So we have a number of questions around the declaration of producer brands, but maybe we'll hold off on those until we get to the part of the registration when you're uploading those documents.
Sure.
We can address those as well.
Yep.
And likewise, we have a few questions coming in around whether or not certain types of tires need to be reported. And our next section focuses on entering supply data, so we'll be able to address those there. I'm not necessarily seeing any questions directly related to account creation, and hopefully that's a good thing, because we did strive to make that system as user-friendly as possible.
Okay. Yeah, in looking at the questions that are coming in, they fit into the next phase of this presentation. So entering your tire supply data. So once your account has been created and you've set your password, the page that you'll get taken to is your dashboard, and it'll show that your account has been activated. And what you'll see here is that you have a unique identifier on your dashboard. It'll be in the upper right-hand corner of your dashboard. That's the unique identifier that is referred to in various places in the tire regulation. So everybody who's required to be registered has a unique identifier. Tires get tracked against that unique identifier, and the tires that count against your targets can be counted because they're complying with the unique identifier rules along with some of the other rules that are there. Your status will, we have a number of payment methods that we'll get to in a minute, but if your status is showing as pending, the primary reason for that will be because you haven't actually completed the report, which is on your dashboard here, and you still haven't paid your fee. So until all of that is done, your status remains pending. So you'll see that there's a report for tires supplied in 2014, 15, and 16, and you'll see that there's a start button. You click on the start button, and then you just follow the process from there. Now, there's two ways that you can enter in your tire supply data. The first way is, it depends on whether you previously submitted that data to OTS. So the next couple of slides are based on the assumption that you are using the data that you previously submitted to OTS. So if you were a steward in the OTS system and the tires that you were a steward for in the OTS system are the same tires that you're going to be a steward for, a producer for in our system, then you have the opportunity to use that information. And the advantage of being able to use that information is that you don't have, that information does not have to be accompanied by a third-party audit report. When the ministry was doing its consultation on the draft regulation, a lot of people had raised the question of, well, I already gave this information in OTS, why can't I just use it again? And so the ministry obviously agreed that that would be okay. And when we looked at the way that information was reported to OTS, we realized that the regulation only has 4 categories of tires, but OTS was receiving supply data in 18 categories. So we had to figure out a way to translate 18 categories into 4 categories, and that's what we're looking at on this slide. So if you're using OTS data, you start with the year 2014, and then you'll see an open button. If you're submitting data using the 18 categories, use the conversion tool by clicking open, and when you click on that open button, it takes you to a tool that is available for converting the 18 categories into 4. Before I move to that slide, it's important that if you are going to put in OTS data that you have to answer yes to the question that's on this page. Did you previously submit this information to Ontario Tire Stewardship? And then just for convenience, we know that sometimes, if you're a new reporter, that you didn't supply any tires in a particular year, rather than having to put zeros into all of the fields, you can check off, I didn't supply any tires in this year, and then you save the year, and then you move to 2015 and fill that in 2016. So that if we go to the next slide, you'll see the conversion tool that I just mentioned. You have to scroll down through this to get all 18 categories, but essentially these are the 18 categories that OTS used. And the way OTS collected its information, the stewards simply entered in the number of units for each of those categories, and then they applied a conversion factor to that to come up with kilograms. So we have taken those conversion factors, and so all you have to do is enter in the units that you previously reported to OTS. The conversion factor automatically calculates the kilograms. It's important to note that one of the conversion factors that we're using is different from the ones at OTS, and that's for passenger and light truck. Passenger light truck in the OTS system, the conversion factor was 10 kilograms. When the ministry was looking at that, they determined that 10 kilograms was it was too low, and determined that 12.5 kilograms was a better conversion factor. So if you have your OTS information and you're looking at, oh, I just put in the units for passenger and light trucks that I did in OTS, but I'm getting a different kilogram number from the kilogram number in OTS, well, that's the reason why. It'll be higher under this system than it was in OTS because of the change in conversion factor. Once you complete this for the particular year, when you hit next, this will automatically populate the previous, if you go back to the previous slide, Ellen, it'll automatically populate the 4 categories with the kilograms, and then you can save the year, go to 2015, open the conversion tool for that year, and then do the same thing and repeat that for each year until you're done. And then once you've saved each of the years, you'll be able to continue with the registration process. So that's the approach if you're using data that was previously submitted to OTS. If you're not using data previously submitted to OTS, then you're not going to use the conversion tool, and you're going to answer no to the question, was this information previously submitted to Ontario Tire Stewardship? And if you're not using OTS data, then you will put in the number of units for those 4 categories, and you will put in the total kilograms that apply to those units, and you will, at the end of the process, be required to upload an audit report to verify those numbers. And again, you'll do that for each year, and then save each year, and then once you've done that, you can move on to the next part of the registration process. Is this a good point to answer some of the questions?
Yeah, we have a number of questions coming in about submitting your data. I'll just kind of start with one that is more about which type of tires to report, and it's a question about a producer who imports trailers from the U.S. as well as Canada, and they're confused about which trailers they would have to report.
So again, it doesn't matter where the tires or the vehicles are imported from. If you're the importer of those vehicles, in the case of this question, you have to report all of them, whether they come from the United States or whether they come from Canada. The key is that those trailers are coming into Ontario, being supplied into Ontario with new tires, and they're going to be used in Ontario. So the point of origin doesn't matter. You still have to report them if you're supplying them into Ontario.
Okay. And then another question about what types of vehicles need to be reported. If this person's asking if they sell new and used motorcycles and ATVs, that they have to keep track of the tires. If they also sell used trucks, do they have to keep track of those tires as well? And then additionally, they also sell new loose tires, and do they need to keep track of those?
Yeah, so what has to be reported is either new loose tires or new vehicles with new tires. If you're selling used vehicles, you don't have to report those. It's only the new vehicles with new tires and new loose tires. And it doesn't matter whether it's trucks, motorbikes, or whatever, as long as the tires are new or the vehicles are new, you report them.
We have a number of similar questions coming in around the data that was previously reported to OTS, and why we're not taking that data directly from OTS, and why we're asking producers to enter it themselves.
The main reason for that is that under the regulation, each producer is now individually responsible for a collection target and a tire recycling target. Whether they're actually a producer for those tires, has to be determined by each of those producers. And the fact that you are a steward doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically a producer for those tires. So we weren't in a position to screen the existing stewards and figure out, you know, who's going to be a producer and who's not going to be a producer under the definition that's in the regulation. And it wouldn't be appropriate for us to do that. It's really part of the individual producer responsibility to look at the definition that's in the regulation and look at the business that you're in and determine what vehicles am I actually the producer for given the rules and the regulation. OTS operated under slightly different rules, and so that's the primary reason why we just didn't take the OTS data. You know, there were people who were voluntary remitters in the OTS system, for example, who aren't producers in the new system, and you know, so that was important as well, and that's not our call. It's really driven by the definition that's in the regulation.
Okay. We also have a number of questions coming in from people about how they can get their data from OTS, and what if they're having difficulties getting the full 3 years of data.
So I guess I would say two things. One, the supply data was actually entered by the actual steward. So if you're not able to log in and get the data that you actually got, then obviously you have to then talk to OTS. If you're not able to get the data from OTS after that, then you know, give us a call and we'll see what we can do. But OTS should have the information that it received from producers, from stewards, because stewards gave it to them, and stewards had accounts that information was put into and should be able to log into that account and get that information. But let us know if there's any challenges on that front, and if we're able to do something to help you there, we will.
We have a question around the conversion tool. It says, do I have to use the conversion table if I am using OTS data? If they sell, and they're asking specifically about certain types of tires that are between 5 and 8 kilograms. They're asking if they should use the actual weight, and if they do they need an audit report?
Yeah, I certainly understand why you're asking this question, because your collection target is set based on the number of kilograms that you report in, and if you're selling tires that are between 5 and 8 kilograms and they're being counted as 12 kilograms, your collection target will be too high. So the answer is no, you can definitely use actual weight. The part of the consideration that you have to go through is, if I'm going to use the actual weight, then I have to get an audit report that supports those numbers, and I have to be able to upload that. But that's all doable. It's just you already know the units that you reported in and to OTS. So from my perspective, if you're using the same units that you reported into OTS, you don't have to have an audit report to support the unit numbers. But given that you would be putting in different weight numbers, you'd have to have an audit report to support how you calculated that weight. And I would assume that, you know, these tires have specs, and the specs include weights, and you have a process for determining, you know, what the weights, the actual weights of those tires are going to be. And if that's the case, then a third-party audit shouldn't be very difficult either. But again, if there's some specific questions on that you want to follow up, we're happy to have a follow-up conversation.
We do have a question around submitting your data by the deadline, and someone was asking what do you have to do by that August 30th deadline? Do you have to create your account? Do you have to submit your data? What do you need to do by that date?
What you have to have done by that date is created the account, registered, and provided the supply data so that you have your collection target. If you're concerned about your ability to meet that deadline, I mean, I would encourage you to contact us so that we have the ability to understand what the issue is, so that maybe we can help you get there. But it is a deadline that the regulation establishes that deadline, and what's required by that deadline is your supply information all the way through to any audit report that has to be uploaded to support that.
We had a question, and I might, I'll ask the question, and then perhaps we might need some clarity from the person asking the question. And it's asking about the tire producers who have already registered with RPRA, and then they're talking about the data call system not providing them with their past tire supply data that will determine their cost. Will this data be populated into the RPRA system?
So the data call system has nothing to do with this program. The data call system that the authority administers has to do with the Blue Box, and so I guess the answer is no. There will be no data out of the data call system being populated into the RPA system in relation to tires. What I think you might be actually referring to the data that you previously submitted to Ontario Tire Stewardship, which is a separate organization from us, and that's where you have to go to get your OTS data, your tire supply data. And we're not pre-populating that for the reason that we weren't in a position to determine if somebody who was a steward reporting into OTS, we weren't in a position to determine if they're a producer that has to report into us. So that's why you have to go and get your own data and then answer your own question around what kind of producer am I, what tires am I a producer for, or new vehicles as the case may be, and then report on those as required by the regulation.
Okay. So the remainder of questions, again, are dealing with the declaration of brands, which we'll get to at a later point in the presentation.
Yep.
And then we just to clarify, for anyone who's on the line having some difficulty hearing the presentation, or if you know of anyone else at your organization who would be interested, we are recording, and we will be posting the entirety of the presentation with audio on our website after the presentation.
It's very important just to finish up then on the tire supply data that you review it and make sure it's accurate, because once it's submitted, there won't be an opportunity to change it after it's submitted, at least through the portal. You'll have to work with a registry officer afterwards if there's an issue with what you've reported. So we'll move on then to the next part of the presentation that deals with uploading your documents. So once you've entered in your supply data, and you've reviewed it, and you're satisfied that you entered it accurately, then you've hit submit for each of the 3 years. You're into the next part of the process. You will see a number of things that you have to do next. So the first one is to upload the declaration of producer brand. So I refer to this at the front end. This is part of the checklist that you should have ready going into this registration process. Once your supply data is in, you will be prompted to upload that declaration. So you will have saved it, and you will then locate it where you saved it, and then select it, and then hit upload, and then it'll be uploaded into the registry at that point. So while we're on the declaration, why don't we answer the questions relating to the declaration?
Yeah. We have a question asking if we sell replacement tires, but we have an agreement with the tire supplier that they report, do we still need to report on the tire brand?
So the only reason that you would have to report on the tire brand in the first place is if you are the producer for those replacement tires. So if you buy those replacement tires from someone else who's resident in Ontario, you're not the producer for those tires, and you don't have to report them. If those tires were tires that you arranged to bring into Ontario, which makes you the importer, then you would have to report them. It has nothing to do with whether there's an agreement with the tire supplier. It really has to do with where did you get the tires from? Did you get them from outside of Ontario, which makes you the first person to bring them in, which makes you the producer? Or did you get them from somebody who's already resident in Ontario, which makes them the producer potentially, unless they got them from someone else who's in Ontario, which is why I think people really have to look at where their supply comes from. So this ties back to whether you're a producer for those actual tires. But the fact that you have an agreement with someone else to report them doesn't get you off the hook for reporting them if you're actually the producer for those tires. You might have an agreement with somebody who happens to be the producer, in which case you're fine, but if that person doesn't happen to be the producer because they're outside of Ontario, then you're the producer and you have to report them.
And the next question we have is, when we say the declaration of brands, how specific do you have to be? Is it just the manufacturer, or is it specific to the make and model of the vehicle?
So we don't need it all the way down to the model, but I mean, if Ford Motor Company, for example, is going to report its brands, it's just not going to say Ford. It's going to say, you know, here are the brand names of the vehicles that we sell. So, you know, whatever those are, I don't even know what Ford brands are anymore, but there's so many of them. But so for the trailers, for example, because I think this question comes from a trailer manufacturer, it's really just the brand that goes with that trailer. So as opposed to the individual model number or that might be associated with that.
Okay, and then we have another question specific to kind of what tires they need, what sales they need to report to us. And this person's saying that they manufacture a product for rescue that they sell to their dealers in Canada. They submit data and reporting sales to this dealer in Ontario. And is there a way of capturing a negative or credit from RPRA after reporting, as our dealer sold these outside of Ontario?
So I'm not sure if I fully understand this question, but so if you want to give me a call afterwards, I'd be happy to help you. The contact information will be available, but I'd need to know a little bit more to understand the question a bit better.
Okay. Our next question is around what happens when a manufacturer changes their brand. It says our manufacturers change their brands regularly, so when they change, do we have to add this supplier to our account?
So there's an opportunity to upload a updated spreadsheet from time to time. We will be looking for that to be updated on an annual basis as part of the annual reporting requirement. If you want to do it in between reporting requirements, the ability to do that is there. When you're in your dashboard, you'll see where you can change or update your brands. But it's not necessary to update that on just because you've changed the brand name halfway through the year. But at the end, in the reporting, once you report annually, you'll be updating that anyway. So.
And similar to one of our previous questions, again, just on the how specific the information needs to be. If you are a manufacturer of a product that has a brand name and a model number only, can they use the brand name?
All we want is the brand name. I think that's all that's necessary.
And the next question we had is around updating the brand.
On that last question, I mean, if it's feed mixers or conveyors, like maybe brand name feed mixer and brand name conveyor or brand name whatever the type of equipment is, just so that there's some ability to understand that it applies to a type of equipment, but we definitely don't need the model numbers.
And then we have a question of what if my brands change after I complete my registration?
As I say, you can always update that anytime by logging back in. You'll be prompted to update that on your annual report anyway.
We have a question about the historical data. And so does the 2014 to 2016 information require brands as well?
The brands that we want to know about are the brands that you're currently dealing with. Okay, we have some more questions. We might as well touch on them now. They kind of relate to the previous section around setting up your account. We have a person asking about their role and how they would be registered in the system. I'm the policy person, and the payment goes through our finance department. Can I be the one to register and set up a finance person as a second? Absolutely. Yeah, you can be the billing contact, or someone else can be the billing contact, and you get to set it up whatever way works for you.
And then the next question is, does the entire registration process need to be completed in one sitting, or can we come back to it if we're missing information when we get halfway through? Once
you've created the account and set your password, you can come in and out as many times as you want. So if you've started putting in some of the information and you want to come back later and finish it, no problem, the system will save it. Prior to creating your password and actually setting up the account, you'd have to start over again, but it takes 5 minutes to set up an account, and so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so then you, having uploaded your spreadsheet with your brands in it, the next thing you have to upload is your executive attestation. Again, this is something that prior to registration you would have gotten ready, but based on the question I just answered, if for whatever reason it wasn't ready, well, at this point you can log out again, go get it signed, and then you can log back in. All the other stuff is already there, and then you can proceed to upload the executive attestation as well, and then carry on from there. For people who don't necessarily have equipment in their office to scan this document and turn it into a PDF, maybe that's a small operation or whatever, you do have the option of taking a picture on your smartphone, which everybody has these days, and saving that as a file, a JPEG, and you can upload a JPEG. Just make sure you upload the right picture. And then the last thing that if you answered yes to the question, I'm using OTS data, you won't be asked for an audit report because you're using identical data. If you're putting in different data, you'll be answering no, I'm not using OTS data, or I want to use actual weight as opposed to the conversion factors, or whatever the reason is. Then you'll be prompted for your audit report, which also would have to have been prepared in advance and saved as a PDF file, and then this is where you upload it. Once you've uploaded everything that's required, the 2 files or the 3 files as the case may be, if it includes an audit report, you get to the payment field. So I don't know if there's any more questions.
We have a couple of questions that are still related to the reporting of tires and which tires to report. So we might as well take them just for further clarity. If I am a vehicle manufacturer who buys tires in Ontario only, am I a producer?
So this is a question that we've identified internally. So there's a couple of scenarios here. The first scenario is I'm a vehicle manufacturer who buys tires from someone else in Ontario as opposed to from outside Ontario. We are looking at that question right now to determine if that vehicle manufacturer should actually be required to register as a producer, because the whole point of registering as a producer is because there's tires that no one else is registered for. But if those tires were sourced in Ontario, then someone else will have been reporting those tires as a producer of those tires, and our concern would be that if they've reported those tires and then they're put on a vehicle that you've manufactured and then you report those tires, the same tires are in the system twice, and we don't want that. So if you want to follow up with us afterwards and to have more of a conversation on this one, we're happy to have that. So it's a very good question.
Yeah, and there was actually another individual asking the same question. So again, if you'd also like to contact us, we can talk to your specific situation. And the third one is actually along the same lines as well, just around keeping track of tires that they're getting from tire manufacturers who are located in Ontario. So again, if you want to contact us, we can clarify that for you.
The motorcycle question, or I think I can certainly answer that question in part right now. If you're importing the motorcycles into Ontario, then you have to report those brands of motorcycles and the number of tires and their weight because you would be the producer for those tires. The external manufacturer isn't going to be reporting. That's why the OTS system was set up the way it was, and that's why the Ontario Tires regulation was set up the way it is, because tires come in through 2 completely different paths. If they come in as loose tires, the fact that the manufacturer is delivering tires into Ontario as loose tires doesn't mean that the manufacturer has any line of sight to the tires that are put onto vehicles that are then brought into Ontario. So, and because of that lack of line of sight, both the original system and the new system is set up that the vehicles are reported separately from the loose tires, and regardless of whether they ultimately have the same manufacturer up the supply chain. But again, if you want to have a more specific conversation, please do call us. It's an important question. And this takes us, I guess, to the last stage of the registration process, which is where you pay your fee and then submit your report. We have currently 4 payment methods available. There's a 5th one that's in the works, which is electronic bill payment. This is where you go into your bank account and select the authority as a payee and then pay the bill, similar to how many of you would pay your personal credit card bills or your telephone bill or utility bill. But that's almost complete. So there's a couple of banks that haven't yet confirmed that they've added us as a payee, and until we're added everywhere, we're not making that one available. But we expect in the next week or 2 it will be. So there are 4 methods: pre-authorized debit, credit card, EDI, which allows you to give us your banking information so that the bank can withdraw that information, the fee, and put it into our bank account. And then, of course, check. Our least preferred method is check, but of course, if you end up sending us check, we will cash it. And the fee is based on the supply data. If your supply data indicates that you're below a certain threshold of kilograms of tire, then there's a flat fee of $75. I think it's 1,000 kilograms is the cutoff. So anybody 999 kilograms or less only pays $75. Above that threshold, it's based on a per unit basis. So it's approximately 14 cents per unit is the fee that's calculated. So the fee gets calculated automatically once your supply data has been entered, and then there's an invoice that's presented to you. And once you submit your payment, you will then be able to submit your report. And once you've submitted your report, you're done. Once you've submitted the report, you can then check your registration status anytime you want. Your registry dashboard will show you as having completed your report, and you can review that. You can view that at any time you want by logging in. Your status will remain pending until your payment has cleared. So, for example, if you chose the check option, until we've received the check and noted that on your file, your status will remain pending. And a couple of the other payment methods operate the same way. The credit card one is instant, and once you've paid and submitted, you're fully registered.
Okay. We have a question around the frequency of reporting. Do we report monthly? When is it due, and when is payment due?
So in the old system, OTS required stewards to report in monthly. In our system, you only report in annually, and so the first annual report and the annual fee payment will happen regularly in May of every year going forward. It's important to remember that unlike OTS, we're just running the registry. We're not managing the tire collection and the tire recycling program the way OTS was. So OTS was paying, for the whole program, and presumably for cash flow, required people on a monthly basis to pay for that program, and whereas that program is going to be managed separately from us by producers directly or through producer responsibility organizations who are playing a similar role to OTS for producers, but we're not involved in that process. So it may be that you'll be making monthly reports and monthly payments to your pro or your service providers, but for us, it's once a year.
So then just to further clarify, someone was just asking, is this going to be a one-time payment?
Yes, so this is an annual payment that the authority operates on a cost recovery basis. So we're obligated to build and operate a registry, and we're obligated to monitor for compliance and to take necessary enforcement steps as required. And it's the cost of doing that we're recovering from in our fees. The fees are set on an annual basis based on the cost of actual operations. The OTS fees are to administer the whole program, so that's a separate cost and from us. When the authority was overseeing OTS, a portion of the fee that was being collected from producers represented the cost associated with our oversight of OTS, but that was a very small percentage of the total amount you were paying to OTS, and that percentage isn't really changing. It's about 2%, I think, of the total cost to deliver the recycling program.
Okay, so Pat, you've provided the answer to the question we had. Just clarifying, what is the fee for?
Yeah, it's to build and operate the registry and operate the compliance program.
The remaining question in this section, again, it goes back to the reporting of brands, and it's for producer brands. Are we reporting the vehicle that the tire is put on or the specific tire brand? We sell new tires that could be installed on a large number of vehicles and machines.
So if you're selling the vehicles, you just tell us the brand of the vehicles. We don't need to know what the brand of tire was on the vehicle. We just need to know the brand of the vehicle. If you're selling loose tires, then you tell us the brands of the loose tires, and we don't need to know what vehicle it's for. We just need to know that. Potentially you could be reporting two kinds of brands. If you're selling vehicles, so if you're a car dealer, for example, you'll be selling new cars. And if you're a car dealer, it's very likely that the people that you sell new cars to will come back to you to get replacement tires, so you'll be selling loose tires. So that car dealer would say, here's the brand of cars that I sold, and here's the brand of loose tires that I sell, and that's it. So we don't need to know what the brand of tires is on the cars originally, but we do need to know what loose tire brands you're selling.
We have two questions coming in that I believe we covered in our submitting your supply data section, but maybe we can just repeat them here for clarity. One person is saying, as a trailer importer, we have different sizes of tires for each trailer. Do all sizes need to be reported separately, or just a bulk number of light passenger tires as in the past with OTS?
It's just the bulk numbers. In the regulation, there's only 4 categories. There's passenger light truck as a category. There's medium truck as a category. There's off the road, and then large off the road. So those are the 4 categories. Under the OTS system, there was 18. So if you're going through the OTS process with our conversion tool, it's again just the bulk number for each of those 18 categories, and then the conversion factor applied to each category.
And next question, if we know the amount of tires, how do we know what the kilograms are? Do we figure that out from our previous OTS calculation?
So when you were reporting tires into OTS, you would have been reporting them as tire units within each of the 18 categories, and then OTS would have applied a conversion factor to those numbers, and then you would see the kilograms associated with what you just reported. It works the same way in our system. You either are using OTS data and our OTS and our sort of 18 category conversion tool, which will calculate the kilograms, which will then populate the kilogram field for you, and you'll see it. Or independently of the OTS information, you'll be reporting in the units and telling us the actual weight. As, for example, the motorcycle tire question that we asked, that came up earlier. If you want to put in the actual weight, yeah, you'll have to figure out what the actual weight is and have an audit report to support that.
We have a clarifying question from earlier. Someone's educating us on what Ford's brands are. They're saying that Ford has 2 brands, Ford and Lincoln, but they have many models within each brand. And are you going to be required to list the model number?
Yeah, the model name. Yes.
Okay.
I completely messed up that answer, but I did mean to say the model names, yes, and I should have recognized that Ford and Lincoln are 2 probably separate brands, yes.
Yeah. And we have a question around the reporting dashboard. Is the dashboard that they're seeing for the initial registration of the 3 years, is it going to be the same for their future annual reporting?
Yes. So when we get closer to the first annual reporting deadline in 2019, the only thing that producers will have to report in 2019 will be the next year of supply data. So this year you will have given us 14, 15, and 16 annual data. Next year you'll give us 2017, and report that in. And because you're already registered and because we have contact information, you will get reminder emails automatically ahead of that to remind you that it's coming up time for and a new deadline of May 31st to get in your next year of data. And then when you put in that next year of data, a new collection target will be generated for 2020. In the meantime, you're still working away on 2019 collection and recycling, which you will report in 2020. So yes, so every year your dashboard will show what's next and what's needed, and you will get reminder emails.
And we have a question asking why we're not asking for 2017 supply data now.
So again, this was to recognize that a couple of things. The first one was the fact that the more recent the data is, the more likely the possibility is that there might have to be adjustments, and we didn't want to have to deal with adjustments once tire supply data is actually submitted in, because that would require changing collection targets and changing fee collection and all of that stuff. So we wanted to make sure this was locked down data. Secondly, there was a recognition of the fact that when a new tire is put into the market, it lasts for 4 to 5 years depending on usage, and so going back to 2014, 15, and 16 and using the average of those 3 years was a better number for generating a collection target for 2019 than using more recent data.
And finally, we have a question asking if people still have to pay OTS until December 31st.
So the authority approved OTS's wind-up plan some time ago, and that plan includes a fee elimination that kicks in on October 1st. So you have to pay OTS fees until October 1st, but those fees are being paid to OTS to deliver the OTS recycling program that has to continue until the end of this year. So it's quite separate from us.
We have a question. It's probably one more for OTS, but how long will the OTS data be available, especially as we have to report 2017 for 2019 and 2018 for 2020?
Yeah, so again, the wind-up plan requires OTS to hand over all of its data to us at some point at the end of the wind-up process. OTS will stop being responsible for delivering the recycling program at the end of December of this year, but tires that will have been collected before the end of this year still have to be processed, and there's a period into 2019 where processing activities for those 2018 tires will continue, and then at some point after that there will be a liquidation process, and eventually at some point in 2019 the OTS will be fully wound up. But as part of that process, there will be a transfer of data to us. With respect to how people get access to their 2018 data, we will work out that process because obviously OTS won't be available. We will probably be recommending strongly that if you're reporting data in 2018, keep a track of it because that'll be the best way to have it because you're the one that's reporting it, and you should keep a record of what you reported. We will have a record of what was reported on the OTS side, and if we have to check against it, we can, and if people need assistance, we'll provide it.
Okay. We have a couple questions around the targets. So this person's looking for clarity on what the target number is, and then asking what happens if we don't meet our target.
So there's actually two targets. One is a collection target, and the other is a recycling target. The collection target is set based on the supply data that you provide, and it's set on the basis of taking the average of those 3 years that you will have reported in by dividing the total of the 3 years by 3, and then multiplying that by 0.85. And the reason that it's multiplied by 0.85 is that, again, the ministry recognized that when a new tire is put on a vehicle and used, it wears, and the used tire will be lighter than the new tire, and that's what that 0.85%, that 85% reflects. So you have to collect 85% of the weight of the new tires that you put into the market based on that calculation, and then so if you don't collect 85%, you've missed that target, and potentially there are compliance consequences that will follow on from that. So the authority has a number of compliance tools available. There's compliance orders, there's administrative penalties, and there's prosecutions. But our approach to compliance is one that's basically a progressive approach. We know we're going into a transition year, and our primary focus will be making sure that people understand what the obligation is, so that as much as possible, people will just go in and do what they need to do. And then with experience, we can ramp that up to stronger responses when there's non-compliance based on the facts of a particular case. So, but we don't go in with a big hammer at the outset. We start off with education, and then we move up the ladder to those more impactful tools. So that's the collection target. If you miss that target, you still have to meet your recycling target. Your recycling target is based on recycling 85% of what you actually collect. So if you miss the collection target, you can still make your recovery target, because you should be able to make the arrangements to make sure that whatever was actually collected, either directly by you as a producer or by a pro on your behalf, through the contractual arrangements that you make with a pro, that you should be able to meet those targets.
Okay, so we move on to the final section of our presentation.
A couple of times I've mentioned pros, and once you've got once you're fully registered, everything has been submitted that has to be submitted. There is one last question. We know that the vast majority of producers are going to enter into commercial contracts with pros, and it's important for you to identify who those pros are. So your dashboard will ask you the question: have you entered into a contract with a pro? And if the answer is yes, then you will be given the opportunity to provide us with some information about who that pro is and what you have retained them for. We've set it up so that for each category of tires, you have to identify the pro. We know that the majority of people will probably have a relationship with one pro, but we also know that in the marketplace where there's several pros active, that people will have the opportunity to contract with more than one pro, and based on for business reasons. So you might decide that you want to retain a particular pro to deal with the passenger light truck tires or medium truck tires, and a different pro to deal with off-the-road tires, based on what your collection target is and how much of it has to be done with large tires. So we require you to tell us for each of those categories, who the pro is, and if it's the same pro, you just select the same pro. The only ability to identify pros will be from a pull-down menu. So if the pro isn't registered with us yet, you won't see your pro's name there. But we have worked with the people that we know want to be pros and encouraged them to register. And we now have 3 registered pros, and their names are published on the website, as all registrants will be as they start coming in the door. And as new pros come in, we'll publish their names as well. So you identify who your pro is, and then later on in the course of a year, or at the end of a year, or for the next year, if you want to change who your pros are, you have the ability to come in and say, I have a different pro now that I'm letting you know about. And it's important that if you go to the next slide, yeah, we have it. It's important for you to tell us why you're hiring that pro. And if you are going to, if one of the things that pro is going to do for you is report on the performance for collecting tires and the performance for recycling tires, you need to let us know that, because the only way that the pro will be able to put that information into your account is if you've told us that they're reporting on your behalf, and if you've indicated that you're consenting to having them have access to your account for that purpose. If you don't tick off this, your pro will not be able to get access to your account, and they'll probably call you up and say, so I can't get in, can you let me in? And then you're done. Anytime that you want to come back in, you just log in. Anytime you want to update anything that needs updating, you come in and you can come in and do it. You can come in at any time to change the pros that you've contracted with. So it's particularly important to make sure that if you do end up changing contractual relationships with pros, that you do come in as early as possible, because otherwise the reporting process that they're required to do on your behalf won't work. They need your consent.
Okay, so we have a question coming in around pros, and the question is, can my pro report my sales data?
No, your pro cannot report your sales data. The way we set it up is producers, they know what they're selling, and they're going to report on what they're selling. Pros know what they're doing in terms of collecting and reporting, and they're going to report on that activity. And we also wanted to make sure that, recognizing that this was a competitive marketplace, that we weren't getting in the way of the ability of producers to manage their own businesses the way they wanted to. So we didn't want to assume that a producer would automatically hand over supply information to a pro. They might have business reasons for not doing that. They might just contract for a specific number of kilograms of work with one pro against another. They might have an RFP process. It doesn't matter. We just thought if there's a competitive marketplace, the market will take care of that. If a producer wants to provide that information to a pro, of course they can, but for our purposes, we didn't want to have any responsibility for managing that business relationship or being involved in that business relationship. So producers have to report what they produce, and service providers have to report what they provide, and we kept those two things separate.
We have someone asking, they're just looking for clarity. They're asking, they're saying, we must register with the RPRA if we are a producer, and they're asking if they have to choose a pro.
So yes, you have to register if you're a producer, but no, you do not have to choose a pro. Every producer is responsible for meeting their own collection targets and their own recycling targets, but the reality is that the vast majority of producers are not in the business of collecting and recycling tires, and so the regulation allows for pros to do that on your behalf, and our expectation is the vast majority of producers will actually rely on pros to do this for them, the same way as they previously relied on OTS to do it, but now it's in a competitive marketplace. But if an individual producer wants to manage its own targets and with its own arrangements, they absolutely can do that. So
the next question we have is, what does a pro do? As we sell new tires on trailers, we do not collect used tires, except if we replace them via service. Do we pay them for their services, or is it covered in our annual RPRA fees?
That's a great question. So it is not covered in your RPRA fees. The RPRA fees only cover the cost of operating the registry and managing the compliance program. Whatever it costs to have tires collected and recycled, that's the producer's responsibility, and it's for the producer to enter into whatever arrangements it needs to enter into in order to be able to comply. In the OTS system, every steward signed up for the OTS program, and OTS delivered that program and collected money to pay for that. In the competitive world, there are now lots of people who are in a position to offer that service and to compete with one another on price, and producers can sign up with anyone they want.
Next question is, we're a producer, but we'll have a limited volume of tires collected as we don't install the loose tires we sell. Customers will go to a shop for the installation where the old tires will be collected.
Right. So there's a difference between being a producer and being a collector. If you're a producer, it just means that you are responsible for making sure that an equivalent number of kilograms of tires was collected and recycled against the tires that you sold into the market. You don't actually have to collect your own tires. The collection target is based on the fact that, for example, if you supplied 100 kilograms of new tires either on a vehicle or as loose tires into the marketplace, then you have to make arrangements to collect 85 kilograms of used tires somewhere in the marketplace to meet your target, and then 85% of that has to be recycled, and you have to make that arrangement. But you're not collecting and recycling your own tires, you're collecting and recycling used tires based on how many new tires you put into the marketplace.
And so then, Pat, just to clarify, we had a question asking, if we just sell new vehicles into Ontario, do we have collection and recycling targets?
Yes. Yes, you do. So based on the number of tires that came in with those vehicles, so when you're putting in your supply data, you'll be saying, okay, I am the producer for this brand of truck, and I sold 50 trucks, and based on those 50 trucks, it has 400 medium truck tires for those 50 trucks. So you'll be reporting 400 medium truck tires, and then a collection target will be generated based on that. When it's converted into kilograms, then it's 85% of those kilograms will be your collection target, and then 85% of the collection target is your recycling target.
So the question is related to that. We sell, we don't collect or recycle, our product goes to consumer. So how does a pro come into play?
So the product goes to a consumer. When I buy a new car, I'm now in charge of the tires that are on my car, and then when I go to buy new tires, I go somewhere and somebody puts those new tires on my car and takes my old tires and keeps them. So pros will be in the business of collecting those tires from all those little collection sites, and there's about 7,000 of them right now across Ontario. And so what pros will be offering is to producers, I'm going to go and make arrangements to have tires picked up at collection sites and taken to processors and processed into processed material, and I'll sell that service to you so that you can meet your recycling and collection targets.
Yeah, and a question we have coming in is just looking for more information on pros and what can they do for clarity.
Yep. Yeah, so we already have some information in FAQs about what a pro can do, and based on whether that's providing you with enough information, based on your feedback, we will definitely be adding more information to that, and always feel free to call our registry team if you have additional questions.
We have a question. Will a list of registered producers be published on the website similar to the list of registered pros?
Yes, so we will be publishing the list of everybody who's registered, so producers, collectors, haulers, retreaders, processors, and pros as they register, similar to how OTS has done it to date.
We have some questions. I'm not sure if we can answer them. Just someone asking, what is an estimate per kilogram cost for a pro service? We need some cost certainty.
So I would encourage you to contact the pros that are out there, because they're the ones that can give you that information. We don't have that information. It's a marketplace. It's marketplace information.
And we have someone just offering more of a suggestion for other callers on the line, saying that they actually had a pro come into their offices to do a walkthrough and go through what they could offer. They said it was very helpful.
Yeah, we certainly have met with the 3 pros who have registered, and we know that they're all out there, marketing and looking for business. So as I say, you should definitely talk to them and find out what they're offering and what it costs, and decide if that's what you want to do.
We have a follow-up to the producing of the publishing of the list of producers, when we're going to be doing that.
So this is going to be like every week. as registration takes place, we'll update that list, and it'll be updated on a regular basis after that. Obviously, between now and August 31st, we're going to see a lot of registrations, and by the end of August, hopefully, everybody who needs to be registered is registered, and that list will be published as it grows.
We have a couple questions just trying to clarify for producers what they're going to need to pay. They're asking, are we in the new system, are we going to have to be paying two people now? So paying RPRA as a producer, but then also paying a collector or paying a pro?
So as a producer who has to register with the authority, the fees that you're paying are the fees that cover the cost of operating the registry itself. So that's all you're paying in terms of the fee that comes to us. With respect to what it takes to actually collect tires and recycle tires, in the OTS system you were already paying for that if you were a steward, and of course it will continue to be a service that has a cost associated with it, and whoever provides you with that service, then presumably you will have to pay them because they're not going to do it for free any more than OTS was doing it for free. So it's important to keep in mind that if you were to look at the total annual dollar value of the OTS program, it costs, I believe, around $65 million a year to administer. If you look at what our fee constitutes, it's less than 2% of that total. The rest of it has to do with the actual cost of collecting, hauling, processing, and recycling tires. And absolutely, there's still going to be a cost for that in the new system, but it's now a market-based system where there will be competition amongst service providers to provide that service to producers.
And our final question is, can we charge our customers for the fee per weight of tire sold new?
Well, I mean, I guess whatever the inputs are to your product, you're going to try and recover those costs in the price of the product. So I'm assuming that the cost of recycling is one of the inputs that people will continue to try to recover. The real question is whether you want to isolate that as a separate charge as opposed to including it in the cost of the product itself. And you can do it either way. If you want to isolate it as a separate charge, then the regulation imposes some important regulatory requirements. And so every time you identify the recycling cost as a separate cost from the price of the product, wherever you identify it, so if it's in an advertisement, on a radio ad, in a TV ad, in a print ad, or on an invoice, or on a cash register tape, wherever that price, in every place of that price, that extra charge is identified as a separate charge, you will have to provide the required information to consumers to understand, so that they can understand what that charge is actually for. And every year, you're going to have to provide a financial audit that demonstrates that the cost that you're collecting was actually the cost to deliver that service, the recycling cost and all of that, that what you were charging was actually the cost that it took to do what you said it was for. This is a consumer protection issue, and alternatively, you can just say, this is what a tire costs, or this is what a vehicle costs, and the price includes whatever the program costs, and then people are competing on price point as opposed to having to spend a lot of time and effort about educating a consumer about one of the components of that price. So again, it's down to you. A similar process was established in British Columbia, and I don't think anybody's charging separate costs over there in British Columbia anymore as a result of that, but you are still able to do it if you want.
Okay, and that's it for our questions. Before I kind of hand it over to Pat to finish us off, just wanted to remind everyone that, again, we are going to be posting a recording of today's webinar with audio on our website at rpra.ca/registry, and you'll find it under the Have a Question section of our website. That little section is also very valuable because it has a link to our registry guide, which is where you'll find the answers to all of our frequently asked questions. And you'll notice just at the bottom of your registry dashboard, or if you go to our website, you'll see a Contact Us form where you can either fill that out, and that your question will be processed by our registry support, And then you can also contact registry support Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 at the numbers listed, so 647-496-0530, or toll free at 833-600-0530. Now I see one last little question popping in before we kind of end off, but it's a good question, so I'll let Pat field this one. And it's, how long do we have to find a pro, a producer?
There's no deadline for finding a pro because there's no actual requirement to have one. So this is really how you want to meet your own requirements to your own collection target and your own recycling target. The reality is that this is an annual target, so you have, during the process of 2019, by the end of 2019, you need to be able to demonstrate that you've met your collection target and that you've met your recycling target, and then to report on that by May of 2020. So there's no deadline, and you know, it's really down to you getting what you need out of the marketplace. As long as you can report by 2020 on what you actually did, that's all that matters from our perspective, and the ability to do that in the marketplace is something that the market is responsible for. So thank you very much for participating in this, and in particular, thank you very much for all the really good questions that you had. These are questions that are important ones. We know that many of you probably have some more sort of detailed questions underlying the ones that you asked, and maybe not necessarily wanted to talk about those in the context of this webinar, but I strongly encourage anybody who has additional questions, please call us. We want to help you. We want to make sure you fully understand what it is you need to do, and we really want everybody to be in the best possible position to be able to comply with these new requirements. And so thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any further questions you have, and the rest of the team as well. Feel free to call us, as Ellen said, 9 to 5, and we're available to do that.
Thank you for joining us today. This concludes our program. You may now disconnect.